When I first started to pursue self-education, to become self-taught, I was met with one huge problem. And it's one that you may have felt and been through as well. There was just so much information that I couldn't even figure out where to start. There was information from a variety of sources. Which would I pick first? And because of that, I was left in the dark. So much options, so much choice. I didn't know what to do next. But over time, I found a solution to that problem I faced. So much of trial and error has taught me a simple framework for me to follow in order for me to become a polymath, but also to learn and create much more effectively. So I'm going to show you the 3-step formula for you to become self-taught and ultimately to become a polymath and come up with original ideas. Let's begin. Although we are facing a time when information has become unprecedented, there's so much information to begin with. And on top of that, there has been a lot of information that can cloud your judgment. In order to become self-taught, we still need to gather that information. We still need to consume. But there is a difference that we want to highlight. Instead of consuming, we want to research. And my definition of research is the active pursuit, the deliberate effort in finding out the specific information to solve a problem. So that can be as simple as finding out how to ride a bike. You're researching a problem, you're researching information for a problem that you face. And we can take that and expand upon that in a much more wider sense. If you find out that a problem that you may have is the lack of articulation that you have, researching and reading books about that problem, reading books on how to articulate yourself in a way, or watching videos that will help you articulate yourself in a way, that is research. The most important quality to begin with in order to become self-taught is the deliberate and intentional use of media, the intentional use of consumption. Instead of going down the rabbit hole of doom scrolling, we want to be deliberate with what we consume. And the first step in order to achieve that is simply to identify what do you actually want to consume. That can be as simple as listing out your curiosities as a whole, or problems that you're facing with, problems you want to solve, and then finding books, podcasts, or videos that help in solving that particular problem. That is research. We don't want to fall into the trap of mindless consumption, where we consume just for the entertainment. Personally, I believe reading books is one of the best forms of consumption because you aren't trapped. You can't fall into that rabbit hole of just clicking one thing and that leads to another and you're mindlessly scrolling for hours. But if you are deliberate, that is what truly matters. If you're deliberate with what you consume, that is the first step to become self-taught and ultimately a polymath. But all that won't matter if you don't follow the next step and the third step. If all you do is consume and you aren't actively thinking about what you read, then what you are consuming has no use for you. It is imperative that you actively think about what you read and you learn something after you're reading. If all you do is consume and you don't actively think about what you're reading or what you're consuming, it's like putting petrol in a broken car. No matter how much petrol you put into that vehicle, into that car, it will not start if you don't fix the underlying problem. Because if you are just passively learning and you're not actively researching about things that apply to your specific scenario, and you aren't actively learning or thinking deeply about them, you are effectively at the same spot that you started with, mindlessly consuming. You're effectively wasting time because it's going in through one ear and out the other. But that's where learning comes in, thinking deeply comes in. Once you think deeply, that is when you level up, you go up that ladder. But you may be wondering, okay, what is a method? How can I actively learn? Well, one of the best ways is using the Feynman technique. Once you read a material, just ask yourself, can you explain it to somebody else? Can you explain the material to somebody who has no experience in that subject? If you're reading a book on chaos theory, can you explain that to an 8-year-old? Can you explain it to somebody who has no experience whatsoever? And this is powerful because it forces you to actively look back into what you actually know. And that's effectively what I'm doing as well. I've identified things that I think I know, and when I try to explain it to somebody or to you, I realize that I have gaps in my knowledge. So I didn't have to go back and actively review again and fill in the gaps of my knowledge. And ultimately, it's a win-win. So after you read something, use the Feynman technique. Explain it to somebody who has no experience whatsoever, to your friends, your family members, anybody you know. Share your knowledge to somebody else, and that will force you to articulate yourself in a way that others must understand. And if you can't explain it to them, it shows that you don't know exactly what you're saying. And that will force you to go back to the drawing board and actively go back and reread and re-understand what you have read. And from that, you will form a greater connection within your mind. It will force your brain to actively connect those neurons of knowledge together. But to take learning to the highest level, to the next step, you need to be creating. And creating is powerful because you force yourself to be open to criticism. When you speak or create videos or you write to others, you allow yourself to be open to others' opinions, and from that, potentially different ideas. So then how can you start creating? Well, in my opinion, especially for conceptual topics, writing is one of the best forms of creating. You can do this by simply reading a book and writing down the key thoughts that pop up to your mind, and eventually form that into a neat essay and share that to others. Because while you are writing, you are also thinking. And from that, it will allow you to actively think and potentially reward some of the things that you have written before. And all the great thinkers of old wrote. Newton wrote his famous work, Principia. It's important that you create because that is a form of thinking and actively clarifying the knowledge that you've gained. And ultimately, you are doing a good service to others by potentially giving them the piece to their missing puzzle. And if whatever you're learning about isn't conceptual, it's technical, create a technical project about it. If it's coding, create a coding project. Create something. It doesn't matter what it is. Creating is key. But in order to become a polymath, you need to combine these three together in a balance. Because too much research will eventually lead to procrastination. Too much learning and you become an encyclopedia. Too much creating and your ideas and projects will become shallow. If you combine these three together into a balance of learning, creating, and consumption, you will have a nice spiral, infinite spiral of ideas and creations that others will love to read and ultimately consume. So if you want to become a polymath, focus on deliberate consumption, research, then focus on actively learning using the Feynman technique, and then finally create, write, or create technical projects or whatever it is you're learning. And from that, you will leave your mark and ultimately change the lives of many.